So unless I'm answering questions where I can look at the camera directly, allow me to put up my video for now. So good morning, everyone. For those of you that have gone through one or two models, I hope you've been enjoying yourself. For those that are joining today, I hope you truly, truly, truly enjoy yourself. So I'm going to be talking about leadership and governance. Without opening any books, without looking at any academic papers, we tend to interchange leadership and governance, and they're actually not the same thing. They're different, but you cannot do one without the other. You cannot govern if you don't have the right leadership skills. So that's why we tend to put it together on this model. Like Donzo says, my career spans from 1996 up to now, and I've been managing teams since 2005, if I recall very well, and gradually the responsibilities have increased. So this slide is just for you to know who I am. It's a very packed outline. So, I mean, this presentation is 62 slides in itself. I'm not sure we'll be able to go through all the slides today, but we're going to at least focus on the critical building blocks. Leadership, governance, what is leadership, what is governance, and then if time permits us, we then start to move into some of the meat, which is dreams, decision making, destination. Then maybe we might look at one or two guys from the scriptures that gives us an idea of also what leadership is. David and Daniel are the ones that come to mind, and there are other leaders in the scriptures also, but let's focus on David and Daniel, and then we'll see whether we can go through all that today. What's our aim? We want to we want to go through all these subjects under leadership and governance, but the objective basically is for us to understand what the concepts of leadership and governance are. Please, I want everybody to mute their mic so that feedback is reduced. Because if you always have feedback, people are going to lose concentration. So humor me, mute your mics. Objective also is to develop the skills and capacity, to start the process of developing the skills and capacity for effective communication and decision making, build the capacity to deliver ethical, visionary, and purposeful governance, which is critical for us in Africa. If you look at Africa today, even if you're not beyond Africa, I mean, look at what's happening in Eastern Europe right now. It's a function of non-ethical governance, right? So governance and leadership has become very critical in the world today. And for those of us that are young people that are aspiring to make a change in whatever sphere of influence we find ourselves, it becomes very important for us to understand what those concepts are. And then to see whether we can develop a working guide for a newer generation of leaders, right, and prospective leaders to be able to implement policies that we align with overall African development vision. Now, my career is in oil and gas, for example. So I can tell you that, for example, when you look at the world today and they talk about energy transition and green energy and so on, oil and gas has been painted as the demon in the room, or the bully. We're blamed for everything that has happened with global warming. But also we forget that without oil and gas, the development of the world today, the way we see it, right, would not have been achieved at the pace that it has been achieved. But there's a bigger argument behind it. The Western world has developed levels of wealth that is unimagined. So they can afford to start to do energy transition, although parts of the Western world is suffering. But what about Africa? Right. So from a leadership perspective, if you look at energy transition purely and from an economic perspective, if Africa is not careful, Africa will be pauperized. Right. We'll basically go back to the dark ages because we will not have energy, because we don't have the infrastructure yet, and so on and so forth. So you see that leaders have started to talk from a business leadership perspective and from a governance perspective that whilst, can you put off your videos, please, so that we don't get distracted? Whilst we are looking at energy transition, it's still important for us to consider that Africa has not got into the level of sophistication that the Western world has got into. And that conversation is being had by leaders at a political level and also leaders at a corporate level. So that's an example of how we have to look for a way to align policies, governance policies, leadership policies with the Africa development vision, because that becomes very important. So historical concept, I'm just going to run through it quickly, right? Leadership theory basically gained center stage from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. And there are several theories that has been postulated by different management researchers and management thinkers. From the great man theory that suggests that leaders are born and not made, right? That suggests that some of those mysterious in inverted commas, open and close, of leadership are only in some select leaders, and those that are not born into rich families do not have that leadership potential. So they must be followers for the rest of their lives. And it went on to the 1930s and the 1940s, where we now started having the trait theories, right, that basically identify specific traits that can qualify any individual for leadership, right? One of the best proponents is a guy called Sturgill that identified 6 groups, right, associated with leadership: capacity, achievement, responsibility, participation, status, and situation. But he then concluded that these traits do not sufficiently explain leadership, right? And that went on. Now, the leaders of today, political leaders of today, corporate leaders, and even civil society leaders are now constrained to act within a context of dynamic system of global pressures and trends, which means leadership continually has become, more important, right? Communication is a big part of leadership. So a company, something's happening in Nigeria recently, I don't know if you've heard about it, with Air Peace, right? And Air Peace, as an organization, the leadership must step up and deal with that crisis, because it is a crisis. It's external pressure, the way they reacted to a request, whether they reacted the right way or not, it has generated a lot of conversation in the polity, and Air Peace as an organization must respond. On the other hand, the traditional leadership that also accused Air Peace must also step up, right? So those are some of the pressures I've started to see. And leaders, whether they are political, corporate, or civil society leaders, must learn to deal with that, right? So the challenge of leadership is then to turn some of those risks into opportunities, right? How do we preempt? How do we prevent the risk? Or how do we, when we are faced with a risk, what do we do? What is our reaction? How do we carry ourselves? How do we communicate our stance? How do we respond to the criticisms and ensure that we then implement changes internally within our groups so that organizations not only can become better, but we can ensure that we have adequately responded to the people that are asking or demanding from us the right response to this crisis. So that is the challenge of leadership. So what is the concept of leadership, right? There are several concepts of leadership, but the concept of leadership started with the idea of a charismatic individual leader recruiting followers into his or her path to solve problems, right? You still see you still see an element of that. Most entrepreneurs are charismatic people. They have a vision, they're able to craft that vision properly, they're able to get people to either believe in the vision, or people believe that they will be paid adequately if they help this leader to achieve his vision, they join his team and they run with it. Right? Now, there's also a team model, tied to this. And that team model, accomplishes 2 critical goals. Better decisions are made because leaders tend to listen to and consider the diversity of inputs from coworkers, right, with different experiences and insights. Okay. And also there's an improved acceptance of the group decision through consensus building. Now, the thing is this: if a leader cannot build consensus, if a leader cannot engender a collaborative process, right, that would then foster compliance because the entire team has made a decision, you will see that that leader will struggle. Therefore, effective leadership requires insight and self-awareness from the leader. It requires that the leader knows how to build an organization and how to manage that organization. Requires that the leader must either know how to communicate or have as a team member that is vast in communication and then can reinforce whatever shared vision has been arrived at and ensure that there is recruitment of followers to carry out the vision and execution of that vision. But also the ability of the leader to basically take that vision out of his head and put it in a format that ensures that everybody can learn from it is also very critical. Now, what we need to realize is this: effective leaders do not possess a defined thematic list of personal traits, right? So let me clarify that. I was born into a family, I was the first, but for years I never saw myself as a leader. Why? Because I grew up in an environment whereby my parents insisted every decision must pass through them. And you will see that in Africa. We insist that our children do not know anything. So because we're their parents, we're their adults, they must do whatever we say, right? When our children do that, we pride ourselves on the fact that we're developing good children that will not disrupt society. However, what we do most times is that we are basically creating robots. We're creating children that when they step out of the home, they will not be able to speak their mind. They will not be able to ask the right questions, and they will not be able to work on themselves to develop the skills that they need to start to lead organizations and even lead small groups of people. And that is why you will realize that most people that are very creative and innovative, Fela is a typical example, right? People like Davido, people like Fowles the Bad Guy are typical examples. Unfortunately, I'm using the entertainment industry as an example, but those guys needed to be rebels to step out of that mold and forge a path for themselves. You see that today also in business. If you look at Nigeria today, Nigeria is gradually becoming the tech capital of Africa. Why? Because a lot of young people grew up in Nigeria. Some of them grew up outside Nigeria, and then they went outside. Some of them went out of Nigeria and then went and did their masters, got introduced to a totally different concept of education that is forcing them to think independently. And then what they do when they come back, they now start to set up businesses. And those businesses today, when you look at some of the results of last year, are now attracting funding from international organizations. Why? Because leaders are expected to deliver high performance, right, in addressing organizational task issues and in considering individuals, right, when it comes to interpersonal relationships. If we had remained with the concept of I am the boss, you must listen to me, most leaders would have failed. There was a time it worked, but the society we are in today, it does not work anymore. So one of the things I would like you to learn today on this call, if you do not learn anything, is that leadership is about convincing people to give you emotional permission to lead them on a journey to achieving a unified vision. If you don't learn anything from me, if every other thing I say sounds like rubbish to you, do not forget that, because that is very important. So effective leadership, therefore, is important for achieving better social, economic, and cultural outcomes for people of a sovereign state. And that's why without effective leadership, governance cannot succeed. So what's the concept of governance and leadership together? They are intertwined. Good governance and leadership is critical for the achievement of results. Now, there's something called the law of the lead, and I think it's John Maxwell, a foremost American leadership expert, that proposed that. And he says, no organization can grow beyond the level that the leader of that organization has reached, right? So the leader of that organization has become the lead over that organization. So if there's anybody in that organization that suddenly wants to or is developing and becoming, a better leader than that leader at the top, if that person does not get out of that organization, or if the leader of that organization does not recognize that and either remove himself out of the way or look for capacity to grow himself, what happens is that frustration sets in for the people that are growing better than that leader, and they will leave the organization. So even in a nation, you see that no nation can develop beyond the level of its leadership. No nation on earth can develop beyond the level of its leadership. Now, what you see is if people are developing beyond the level of the political leadership, what you see most of them do is either they get out of the country and go somewhere else where they see that there's a runway for them to grow, or they move into other endeavors. They move away from the political space. They move into business, they move into other things and leave the political space for that level of leadership. And unfortunately, that's one of the things that you see in Nigeria. When you look at the political landscape in Nigeria, unfortunately, it has been dumped down. There are very few cerebral leaders in the political space in Nigeria. And because there are very few, we have not reached that tipping point where their views, the way they carry themselves, their leadership charisma, right, is impacting the entire political space. Rather, you see a lot more of people that are not educated, that have a very base idea of how leadership should be conducted in the political space. And you see that in the level of violence that occurs during elections. It's not that people in Africa love violence. It's just that the level of leadership is a level whereby we think that it is with force that we can solve problems. You don't see that level of violence in Europe, for example. You don't see it. I mean, there's some specific countries in Europe. It's not that their leaders are better than our leaders here, but the level of leadership has grown so much that the people have also grown with it, right? It does not mean also that you don't have a subset that want to say that, resort to violence. But because the level of leadership has grown, the level of enforcement of laws, even the quality of laws that the political leadership in the legislature brings reflects that level of leadership that has grown. And that is why in Africa, it becomes important for the youth to start to see the concept of leadership and governance intertwined, the concept of effective, socially, what's the word I'm looking for now? Socially committed leadership affecting governance over a long term. That is the way out for Africa. If Africa does not do that, if Africa does not start to develop committed leaders who will govern with integrity and influence Africa's human and natural resources towards the actualization of sustainable regional development, Africa is doomed. But I believe Africa is not doomed because Song Africa is one of those organizations that is helping to change that. So like I said, governance is also more than just leadership. However, without visionary and accountable leaders, governance can become ineffective and can easily, quickly lack credibility. So we've talked about leadership being at the heart of public governance, and these are basically concepts that were developed from the study of several academic journals that looked at that concept, right? Poor leadership and endemic bureaucratic corruption has characterized public sector governance since independence in 1960, and this is talking about Nigeria. And that's been blamed for the slow pace of development in the key sectors of the Nigerian economy, especially in infrastructure. Now, if you are a civil servant on this call, I'm going to crave your indulgence. But when you look at corruption in Nigeria, for example, you will not believe, a lot of us tend to blame the politicians, which is not bad in itself. I mean, politicians, because they decided they want to be leaders, we need to hold them accountable. But the groundswell of corruption actually is in the civil service. Because if the civil service insists that things should be done right, it will be difficult for politicians to subvert it and circumvent it. If the House of Assembly, for example, House of Senate or House of Reps, if they formulate a law, the execution of that law, the transferring of that law into a government gazette is done by the civil servants. The execution, the implementation of that law is driven by the civil servants. If the civil servants do not drive it, or they show the politicians how to circumvent it, it then means that the political class and the civil servant class are basically colluding together to engender corruption. And the moment that happens, you then see that corruption then starts to seep into other parts of society, just like we have it in Nigeria today, so much so that it's even started to seep into even the family. So it's important that's why intertwining leadership and governance is extremely important. So let's define leadership, and I want to stop here before I don't want to talk further here. And I just want one or two people tell me, what is your own concept of leadership? When we say leader, what do you understand as the definition of leadership? Just about two people. And you must talk. Oh. Yes, Mr. Smith.
Yes, sir.
I
Good
noticed.
morning, sir.
Yes, morning.
Yeah, you've been awesome. Yeah, you've said so much insightful. Uh, I've been impacted so far. So my own concept of leadership um will be in a situation where you have a leader and then you have followers as well, like a two coin. So the leader cannot function without the followers. The followers cannot function without the leader. So I think leadership is probably taking decision that will impact on your followers positively or negative. Well, in this case, it's positive anyway. So I think so. The followers they more like bank on you as a leader, in terms of decision making and more of decision making. So they just bank on you and say, okay, whatever you say, is relevant. What counts. So
Okay,
I
thanks.
think
Thanks for that. I truly appreciate that. Thanks. Thanks for that feedback. Any other person? Any other person? Trust me, there's no right or wrong answer. One more person who is courageous enough. If you want to type the answer in the chat group, you can go ahead and type it.
Okay, good morning.
Morning, Emanuela.
So leadership is a concept of um, influencing a certain group of people called followers to a certain extent that even in your absence, they're able to function effectively. Yeah.
Excellent. I love that. Influencing a group of people as followers such that even when you are not there, they can function effectively. Excellent. Thank you very much. So now both definitions that I've gotten basically has talked about the fact that there's a leader and their followers. And there's nothing wrong in that. But there's a concept of 360-degree leadership where you might not even be a leader in that organization, but you are influencing the direction of that organization by recognizing your role within the organization, recognizing the level of influence you have in the organization, motivating yourself to step up and effect change within that organization, and then communicating your desire in such a way that it gets acceptance and it does not scare people. So when you were talking, I wrote down some things. Leadership is about influence, it's about motivation, it's about direction, it's about vision, it's about change, and it's about communication, right? And leadership goes beyond the leader and the followers. Leader and follower is part of it, because in some cases when you have followers and there's no defined leader, what you then see is that somebody most likely will step up to try and give some sense of direction or try to coagulate the purpose of that group. And that person, without training for it or without actively seeking for it, but because he saw in it and he stepped into the gap that is created, because nature abhors a vacuum, might then be seen as the leader of the group. When in actual fact, is not a de facto leader. It's just somebody that recognizes that there's a gap. Let me fill the gap and provide a level of direction, and then the group moves. So you could actually have a group that does not have a defined leader, but they are still achieving something. But that does not make leadership any less important. So if you look at the slide that you see on your screen now, you can look at leaders from different perspectives. From the political space, a political leader is pursuing a passionate and personal cause. Most times it's a personal cause. I want to provide for my people. I want to give my people direction. And he steps us into the political space. An explorer. It could be that he desires that he wants to achieve something. He wants to explore a dangerous place. And he then goes about looking for a team of people that can partner with him in achieving that. So he's cutting a path through the jungle for the rest of his group to follow. Most likely because he's the one that started with the vision and he has studied about it. He has researched about it. So he has more information than the group. An executive that is developing his or her company strategy to either beat the competition, gain market dominance, or in the best case, garner profits, right? So those are all different perspectives. Now, there are different definitions, and there are three that I've put here. One is about social influence. Kevin Cruz, Forbes.com. Leadership is a process of social influence, which maximizes the efforts of others towards the achievement of a goal. So it's influence, it maximizes the effort of others, so others are part of it. So it tells you that a leader that does not have a group of people that believe in what he's doing will not succeed. That's basically what it means. And what is success here? Success is the achievement of a goal. So I'm going to ask you a very funny question by the time I'm done with this slide. So get ready for a very funny question. Leadership also, number two, is an art of motivating a group of people to act towards achieving a common goal. You see the goal there, group of people. This one is now motivated. And this came from Australia. The Indigenous Governance Toolkit of Australia basically defined it that way. Now, Jacobs and Jacks in 1990, in an academic paper, defined leadership as a process of giving purpose, that is meaningful direction, to a collective effort and causing willing effort to be expended to achieve that purpose. Now, it's a collective effort. So there's a leader, but the leader is not saying, I'm the one that thought about everything. Basically, he's saying, let us focus on this problem together. Let us come up with a collective solution that we all can believe in. And then let us execute the solution to achieve the purpose. So leaders do not only help others or do not only help themselves, they're basically helping everyone to do the right thing. Leaders tend to set direction, they build an inspiring vision and create something new. So leadership basically is about mapping out where you need to go to win as a team or as an organization. And leadership is dynamic, it's exciting, it's inspiring. Of course, it can be stressful, but it is all of those good things. So this is my question. Adolf Hitler in the 1930s and the 1940s basically motivated Germany, right, to become an industrialized nation again. And in the process of doing it, it started the Second World War. Is Adolf Hitler, or was Adolf Hitler a good leader, or was he an effective leader? Anybody wants to try?
Yes. Okay. So I can go ahead, right?
Please do.
Okay. I think Adolf Hitler, for me, not a good leader, but an effective leader, yes, because he championed the cause of World War II. You know, I don't know if we're going to experience World War III this time around with Russia and Ukraine. Anyway, that's by the way. So, but I think what he did was not something the world welcomed, but he stood his ground and fought the war, Germany against the world. So, I think he was effective in seeing, that through that war, but it's not a good cause. So he was an effective leader, but not a good leader. Thank you, sir.
Okay, interesting. I like that. Any other person wants to contribute?
Yes, sir.
Elizabeth.
Okay, so yeah, to me, I
Go
feel
ahead.
Adolf Hitler was an effective leader, not a good leader, in the sense that after World War One, Germany was Germany was pushed to the barest minimum. They became poor again because of the sanctions and all that were given against Germany. And so Adolf Hitler rose, gave his people hope again. He made Germany industrialized, as I said earlier. He made Germany rise up again. But in the process of influencing them and giving them hope, he now went the wrong way. That's why I feel it was not really a good leader, but it was really effective because his visions came to life and people bought into his vision.
Okay, excellent. And then also Constance said he was an effective leader, but not a good leader. Okay, fine. I appreciate your feedback. I disagree a little bit, and let me explain. Elizabeth was right? After the First World War, the world leaders of the League of Nations made a fundamental mistake. Because of the strength of Germany, they decided to cripple Germany totally. And that was where they made a mistake, because that process combined with the economic crisis in the United States of the 1930s, that became a global crisis, right? Plunged Germany into this economic mess where people who where people suffered, and that was what threw Adolf Hitler up, right? And Adolf Hitler, in that, he started off as a good leader because he influenced the social conversation. He maximized the efforts of the nation towards the achievement of a goal. His first achievement was to turn around the economy, get manufacturing, get the industry back up again, get the German people to believe in themselves, and he achieved that. If he had stopped at that, the history would have been kind to him to say he was both a good and an effective leader. But he did not stop at that. The moment he got that, because inherently he was evil, right? He then needed to blame a set of people, and he found willing target in the Jews, and then he then decided he was going to take over the world. And then you then see where even his effectiveness then stopped. So he started off as a good and effective leader, but he ended as an evil leader and an ineffective leader. One of the mistakes he made was he did not recognize his own personal limitations. So that he started to take military decisions that effectively got Germany to lose the Second World War. Thankfully, because, and I'm an avid student of the Second World War, the fact that he opened two fronts, one in the West and one in the East, when he had not finished defeating Britain. He had defeated the whole of Western Europe. He remained Britain, that was an island. If he had been able to defeat Britain and got Britain, put a German government in charge of Britain, then facing Russia would have been the next thing. But it was the one that took that unilateral decision of opening up a front against Russia at the same time when he was still fighting in Western Europe. And then that basically got three leaders, Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill, who had different ideologies. Roosevelt was a pacifist. He never wanted to get into the war. Stalin was a bulldog that stood against Hitler. And not Stalin. I'm talking about Churchill. Stalin also was like Hitler. Stalin basically wanted communism to take over the world. So his behavior basically brought three people with different ideologies together to form a formidable opposition. So what was the net effect? Germany suffered. No matter how good or how effective you are, the team you are leading, the organization you are leading must always be the better for it. So thanks for your contributions. I love it, but it shows that you understand the concept we're talking about. So let's proceed. Let's talk about governance now. Governance has been used for many decades. It's a very frequently used term, right? Several studies and papers and recommendations and everything has been done about it. There's been proposals about improving government activities, government measures, and so on. But governance as a concept has been around. Governance as a concept has been around has been around for quite some time, both in the political and the academic discourse for quite a long time. And it refers to the generic sense, in a generic sense, to the task of running a government or any other appropriate entity for that matter. Now, the Webster's dictionary basically defined it in that case, right, as governance as a synonym for government, which is, or the act of or process of governing, specifically authoritative direction and control. Now, this particular interpretation focuses specifically on the effectiveness of the executive branch of government, right? Now, the British Council, on the other hand, emphasizes that governance is a broader notion than government. And one word that I'm going to put out there will give you that idea: corporate governance. Corporate governance has nothing to do with government, but it has quite a lot to do with corporate organizations. So governance is not about the effective branch of government. Basically, it involves interaction between formal institutions those in civil society, and also interactions also even with the political government of the day. So governance refers to a process where elements in a society wield power, authority, and influence, and enact policies and decisions concerning public life and social upliftment. But today we're talking about political governance, not corporate governance. So Wikipedia, which I don't really like using, but when you're putting things like this together, sometimes you need to also look at what people have put out in Wikipedia. Wikipedia says governance is a process of organizing and managing legitimate power structures entrusted by the people, that's the populate, the polity, to provide law and order, protects people's fundamental human rights, a la NSAS that we had in 2020, ensure rule of law, and due process of law, provide the basic needs and welfare for the people, and the pursuit of their happiness. Now, you know that with the pursuit of happiness there, that's basically an American definition. But pursuit of happiness, government ensuring that people can be happy, is a fundamental part of governance. So basically, what I'm saying all is this: governance is all the processes of interaction, whether they are laws, whether they are norms, whether they are power or language of an organized society over a social system. So it could be over a family. So you could actually have family governance where the father and the mother decides what happens in the home, and they decide when they allow the children to be part of decision making. You have a tribe, formal or informal organizations, territory, or even across territories. That's governance in a nutshell. Of course, the Asian Development Bank in 2005 also provided its own perspective of governance. And what it basically summarized the concept of governance to be is the process by which governments are chosen, monitored, and changed, the systems of interactions between the administration, the executive branch, the legislature, and the judiciary, the ability of governments to create and to implement public policy, the mechanisms by which citizens and groups define their interests and interact with institutions of authority and with each other. That is what the Asia Development Bank defined as governance. In the context of what we're doing, that is the context of governance I want us to focus on. So we're talking about governance. It is basically these 4 characteristics that we're talking about today and also in the future within the Song Africa. So what are so like everything out there, everything that has a theory, that has proponents to support it, over time, you will then see misconceptions and misrepresentations developed over them. Now, let's look at quickly some of the misconceptions and misrepresentations of leadership. Number one, people used to believe that leadership is authority. It is not authority. It is more of a permission. Right? Nobody has a right to leadership except people give them that right. And that right comes as a permission. It is an emotional and social permission to say, we recognize there are things that you know that we don't know, so we allow you to lead us. Now, it's important that we don't see leadership as authority. Now, there's a misconception also that leaders have all the answers. You by now will know, when you look at Nigeria in the past six years or even longer, that leaders don't have all the answers. And that is why leaders put teams around themselves. And anybody that is a position of leadership that thinks that he has all the answers, what wants to happen is that you want to kill yourself early, because that means everybody will start coming to you. Right? You will discover that leaders, very effective leaders, develop a process where people, even when they come to them with a problem, they develop a process where they discuss the issue and jointly come up with a solution. Now, there's a misconception that leaders are emotionless. That is wrong, because emotions are an intrinsic part of the human nature. While a leader is not superhuman, a leader also is not devoid of feelings. Please, could you just give me a minute? There's somebody trying to disturb me on the call, and I need to shut that down now. Hold on, please. Okay, excellent. So let's go back. Let's go back. All right. So leaders are not emotionless. In actual fact, very effective leaders that are effective for long periods of time, years and years and years, must develop empathy. because nobody wants a leader that lacks empathy for their team, lacks empathy for the circumstances of that team, and cannot connect to the circumstances. Now, why a lot of supposed leaders try not to show emotion is that it takes a lot of investment to actually show empathy to your team. And a lot of leaders think that when they show empathy to their team, that people will take advantage of them, and that's why they don't do that. But leaders are not emotionless. They actually have a high level of empathy. Leaders are not infallible also. Leaders can fail because they are not perfect, right? So they experience things firsthand. They most likely will have more information than the members of their team. If people are waiting for them to take the right decisions every time, trust me, they cannot take the right decisions every time. So you need to be able to trust that your leaders will develop a process of coming to you and also bouncing off the ideas of you, because leaders are not infallible. The next slide basically talks about the conventional theories of leadership. I'm just going to rush through this. Trait leadership we've talked about earlier, where we believe that some people must have a particular behavior, they must look a particular way. Charles de Gaulle was an example of leaders like that. Because he was tall, people thought he was a natural leader. Thank God he was actually a good leader for France. Abraham Lincoln was also another one. But it's not all effective leaders that are tall, that have that disposition of leaders, that people who see them as natural leaders. I've come across people that they're very small. They don't show any physical traits, but they're effective and efficient leaders. There's a functional and group approach theory of leadership. And this approach focuses our attention on not the personality of the leader or on the man in the job per se, but it focuses more on the functions of leadership. And he ensures that all the functions of leadership are present in any group engaged in a particular task. Now, this approach basically realizes that sometimes, or most times, the identified or recognized leader of that group does not have the skill set to fulfill all that functions of leadership. So that approach tends to then say, okay, fine, maybe we put together a group of people that have different traits that can be used in that group, but we then make sure that one person is a leader who can always get the people to agree by consensus. And that's where the concept of leadership potential comes from. Potential is basically that I look at you, I see what you do today, and it tells me that you have the ability to do more, especially in the direction. Sorry, somebody is good. They're in the direction of leadership. And Kotler in 1990, a foremost management thinker, basically talked about the fact that successful companies seek out people with leadership potential. And that is done with careful selection and careful understanding of who people are and what they bring every time to the table. The next one is a behavioral approach to leadership. Well, like I said, effective leaders do not appear to have any specific traits that points them out, right? But they have been trained to develop the behavior and attitude that enables them to be able to connect with members of their team. And when you look at some of the studies that have been done about this, right, there are two principal dimensions to leadership behavior. One is a concern for people. Like I've spoken about empathy before, that a leader's concern for developing mutual trust with members of his team, right, shown as empathy for the people, shown as an understanding of what people go through, right? Members of their team go through, and they connect with them that way, basically is that basis for concern for people. Now, this is seen as an employee-oriented approach in businesses. It could also be a people-oriented approach in a political environment. Now, the behavior of that leader encourages mutual trust and ensures that people can come and talk to you. When I was leading organizations, by the time I was leading an organization with 1,000 people, when I visit the locations where my people are, maybe workshops and so on, outside Lagos, That week, I fall back on responding to emails or doing anything on my computer. I fall behind. Why? Because I spend more time on the shop floor. I spend more time walking through the corridors of the office, walking into people's offices, sitting down with them, and just having a conversation. People tend to open up when they see that their leaders do that. So that's extremely important. Now, that then fits into the next thing, that next dimension, which is a concern for production. When people are motivated, they produce more. So when managers connect with their people, they understand the skill set of the people, they understand the performance attitude of their people, they understand the competencies of their people. It then becomes easy to then put their people in the right places to achieve the best. So their target is achieving production targets, delivering on profit expectations, which is a tax-oriented approach. But when they take that and they combine it with the employee-oriented approach, it basically then translates into an organization that is performing. When you see a leader that does not show this, but rather will lead the people with a stick and carrot approach, where you do well, I reward you. You don't do well, I punish you every time. What happens to that team is that team will keep losing people. And most leaders that do that, they don't understand that when you lose your people, especially when you have spent time and trained them, you are losing money, because you have to get a new set of people and then you have to train them all over again. This is money you could have saved to do something else. And then in some cases, you then end up creating a terrible culture within that organization, because it then becomes a culture of dog eat dog. People now will stab each other in the back because they know that that is what you celebrate. So it's important for us to understand this concept. Now, the last one I'm going to talk about in theories of leadership is the Likert leadership theory, that basically looked at leadership, and then it says it consists of a continuum of styles ranging from the autocratic to the participative, right? Autocratic basically is where the manager makes all the decisions. They decide what to be done. They decide who will do it. They decide how and when it will be done. If you don't do it, you be punished or you are threatened, which is stick and carrot approach. And in most cases, the employees cannot say, I have another idea, right? Sometimes this works, but it does not work every time. In fact, if I look at a scale of 100%, I would say as a leader, don't use this more than 5%. Then the next step is benevolent autocratic, where the leaders make that decision, but the employees have some degree of freedom and flexibility in performing their jobs, and as long as they conform to specified procedures. This is about 40 to 45% of the time is needed. However, you become more effective when you move to the next one, which is the consultative, where the leaders or the managers consult with the employees prior to establishing the goals of the organization and making decisions about the work. Now, employees in this case have a considerable degree of freedom in making their own decisions for as long as they accomplish the work. Why I don't like this 100%, this is about 10 to 15% of the time, is because every organization, whether it's political or business or commercial, has policies and procedures. You cannot set those aside, because when you set those aside, even the quality of your output, the products you make, the services that you provide, the quality will suffer. Because the reason why you have policies and procedures is so that you conform to boundaries of quality. So consultative is good when you are planning strategy for the future, but it is not good when it's time to produce work. So a combination of consultative and benevolent autocratic can help. Participative also in that mix is fantastic, where the emphasis is on the team participating as a group, where everybody in that team, all the employees, everybody is involved in the process of establishing goals. Everybody has one skill set or the other that is recognized. They are involved in the process of making job-related decisions. They can walk into their manager's office and discuss issues, and their manager or their leader will display a supportive rather than a condescending and threatening behavior. Now, I use this a lot also, and I'll tell you why I use it a lot. When you let me look at it from this perspective. I don't know the ages of people on the call, but the moment you start having teenagers, especially in this world, your explosive autocratic will not work. Benevolent autocratic can work sometimes, but more often than not, less time than normal. What works with teenagers is consultative and participative. And when you look at the generation that we have now, I mean, I started managing in the early 2000s. I started managing people in the early 2000s. And then you then see that about 3 or 4 different generations have basically shown up in that time, right? The generation today, if you give them a book to read, might not read a book. But if you give them a phone and you tell them to listen to an audio book, they would listen to an audio book. So the way you teach them will slightly different, right? If you insist that the only way they can pass an exam is to read a book and pour out everything in the book for you, they will be failing exams. But that does not mean that they are dummies. It just means that their learning style is different. So you cannot use explosive autocritic for them. You then need to consult with them and understand how best they learn. Now that sounds strange in Africa, because in Africa we're used to saying, you must eat your food. What we're eating today is beans. You're not eating anything else. But if you go to Western Europe, go to America, you will see that participative and consultative style has crept into education. You will not believe what children are doing over there. My 15-year-old daughter, when she was 9, I started to put presentations together on PowerPoint, and I started to stand in front of the class to present our ideas. With the exception of private schools here, I'm not sure that is happening so well. So it shows you why you then see a slightly different outlook on ideas with children that's schooled in the Western world and children that's schooled in Africa. And we need to change that in Africa. We need our youth to see that, to be more consultative, to be more participative, because that will change governance ultimately. The last one I want to look at is situational theory of leadership, where Blanchard in 1982 developed the view that leadership approaches develops very much on the maturity of their subordinates. And it defined maturity as a desire for achievement and a willingness to accept responsibility. So you start to see that a lot more in this present generation. And he then says that, so his theory was that, listen, the relationship between leaders and followers will move through phases as subordinates mature. So immature subordinates, maybe you want to use explosive or autocritic, but as they develop, as you give them more tasks to do, as they start to learn to take responsibility, you then start moving from that scale of explosive to benevolent to participative and also to consultative. That's basically the theories that I want us to look at. Now, there are a lot of theories out there for leadership, but let's limit it to those. Let's look at quickly conventional theories of governance. Also confirm that I have 1 hour to go, right? Is Nonso on the call?
I had to unmute myself about 40 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. 40 minutes, and we'll leave 20 minutes for questions, right?
Yes.
Okay, when it's 10 minutes to go, please just give me a sign.
All right then.
All right, thank you. So, okay. With respect to governance, there are different theories of governance. The reflexive theory that focuses on processes that divide governance into first order and second order governance, and it emphasizes on the richness of objects and events that are central to the process of governance, right? The deliberative theory basically sees governance as a process that opens up the participatory process of democracy, particularly in relation to language interpretation in the decision-making process. The argumentative theory focuses on the constitutive forces and the formative conditions for the emergence of government regimes. And then it pays specific attention to arguments when it comes to interpretation of policymaking and governance. The network theory, right, looks at approaches that investigate the patterns of interest intermediation, whereby the public and private bodies, including civil society, well, how they interact and how that leads to the development of governance principles and development of laws within a polity. Now, that advances the idea that transformation from government to governance is an important component of contemporary political leadership. What does that mean? Government is high and mighty. Just like autocratic leadership, we decide what happens, nobody can speak back. But governance is about, let us discuss. That is when the legislative arm basically comes up with a theory, or they come up with an act or a law, and they go around the country and listens to the people. America does that a lot, where they do town hall meetings. And unlike Africa, where in a town hall meeting, if you talk anyhow to the president, they'll pick you up later. In the Western world, you do that, they listen to you. Yes, you cannot attack physically the person of the leader, but even if you want to insult him, they insult him. They listen to you because they know it's about how you feel. That's what you are pouring out there, right? Transformation and transition theories, they share similarity, with transformational leadership theory. And he explains the process of governance in terms of the exercise of political, economic, and administrative authority from one regime type to the other. Now, when you look at Nigeria, transformation and transition theories of governance, could provide a vital tool for explaining the process of decision-making and project implementation. When you look at the authoritarian military regimes that has controlled a significant portion of Nigerian leadership history, and then you look at the democratic civilian administrations. But unfortunately, because most of our leaders have consistently come from the military side, because that's a funny thing. The military men have been trained actively to assume positions of leadership and to see governance as something that they can do because of their training. If you look at the training of generals, especially since President Obasanjo became president, he changed quite a lot of things. And I was talking to somebody last year, he told me, the moment you hit, I think, the level of lieutenant colonel, you are expected to get a master's degree. And most of them do. They actually do either do it in Nigeria or go outside. And you're expected, in some cases, to even go for PhD. If you don't get it, you will be retired early. And why? Because it's a way to ensure that you professionalize the military. Unfortunately, a lot of our civilian leaders do not go through that process. They think is, oh, when I get there, when I talk, people will believe me. They're not going to learn the theory of governance. So you then see quite a lot of retired military officers have moved into the political space. But it is difficult for a leopard to change his spot. So when they then get to that position of authority, the element of their military training in terms of insisting the way things needs to be done still shines through. So and that's why governance becomes something that we must look at actively in Africa, especially for our young people that are not military people, but are trying to get to that level of academic development to become effective leaders in the political space. What are the types of leaders? Molintel J, 1985. Let's look at them. Charismatic leader, gains influence because of the strength of his personality. A traditional leader, a leader whose position is assured by birth. You see that quite a lot in the North. A situational leader, a leader whose influence can only be effective by being in the right place at the right time. Now, this kind of leadership is temporary in nature to be of much value in a business because you have to adjust every time to variety of situations over a period of time. The appointed leader, that leader whose influences arises directly out of his position. Managers and supervisors are like that. That is not exactly a leader. They are mainly managers. They are very bureaucratic in their style of leadership because their influence only comes from their position. The moment you yank them out of that position, they cannot influence a team of volunteers. You see that a lot. You see that a lot in businesses. And then if you get somebody like that and you put in a religious organization, in a civil society organizations where it is about where their position does not have as much influence on volunteers that know that they can walk away. They're not getting a salary from you. They are only coming there because they love what the organization is doing. You cannot be an appointed leader because if you are autocratic in your attitude, people will walk away. So you need them to be more of a charismatic leader, apply situational leadership competencies to manage a group or team or organization like that. Next one is the functional leader. He's a leader who secures their leadership positions by what they are. Right? They adapt their behavior to meet the competing needs of the situation. You see that when you take somebody that's an engineer and you put them over a finance organization, despite the fact that they do not have a finance background, but they have a love for numbers. International organizations, National Business Organizations does that a lot. I've taken somebody from engineering and put in a human resources role to manage a sub-region of about 15 countries before, and she did an excellent job. Why? Because she adapted her behavior from engineering. Because she was a woman also, she brought in, the mother instinct into that role and was able to meet the needs of that role and the needs of the situation. Now, a principle-centered leader is a leader whose approach to leadership is influenced by moral and ethical principles involving the consideration of equity, justice, integrity, honesty, fairness, and trust. Now, this is excellent, but my advice, based on experience, be principled, but you also must be a situational leader. Learn also to be charismatic, because and then of course make sure that you also focus on what your function is at that time and adapt your leadership to meet the needs of the function also. So for me, I will take a mix of charismatic, situational, functional, and principle-centered leader for me to be an effective leader in any role. What are styles of leadership? Authoritarian, participative, delegative. You've talked about authoritarian and participative, so I won't repeat it. Delegative is more like laissez-faire. I let people, determine what they want to do. Everything is okay. That works sometimes, but it doesn't work every time because people by nature are difficult to manage, right? So when you allow people too much latitude most times, and they have not matured to a point whereby they can take responsibility for their actions and for what you have asked them to do, they can tend to divert. And that's why organizations have policies and procedures. Then you have transactional leadership, which uses transactions between the leader and his followers, rewards, punishment, and other exchanges to get the job done. The leader sets a goal, the team members know how they will be rewarded for their compliance, and if they don't do it, they know how they will be punished for their non-compliance. And this is a give and take style of leadership, and is more concerned with following routines and procedures in an efficient manner. Now, managers do this. Now, managing and leadership are two different things. Managers in organizations, middle-level leaderships, accountants, HR managers, and so on do this. But the moment you start to move into the executive cadre, when you start moving into C-suite, when you start to become a director, you then need to be more of a leader than a manager. You cannot be 100% transactional. Then that is when you need to also consider participative and transformational with a sprinkling of delegative leadership style. Now, what are the fault lines for leadership and governance in Africa? Political orientation of leadership and governance is important. Political leaders and even the people must know there's a difference between leadership and governance. There must be a political will to operate within the right theories, behaviors, and styles of politics and of leadership and governance. We need to get authoritarianism out of leadership and governance in Africa. Totalitarianism also we need to get out. Of course, corruption and a self-serving inclination we must get out. These are the fault lines. These are what causes problems for leadership and governance in Africa, not only in the political space, but even in the commercial space. You see a lot more companies sitting on the stock exchange in Africa failing due to the failure of leadership and corporate governance compared to even in the Western world. Now, companies in the Western world fail, but every time you do an analysis of what caused of failure, it is a failure of leadership and a lack or a failure of corporate governance. So that's why leadership and governance is important. And Africa cannot afford to keep waiting on the Western world. We've got to step up. Let's talk about the character of leadership competency model. Developed by a guy called Brian Rice, it captures the foundation of superior leadership as comprised in 5 essential core attributes: character, discipline, humility, courage, and vision. Now, there are also many other behaviors a leader must demonstrate, but let's just look at these 5, right? Because these 5 helps us to build the foundation of effective leadership, right? Let's go back to there. Your character basically ties in with integrity. Your discipline ties to your attitude, right? Do I focus on doing the difficult things, or do I focus on doing just enough to get by? Then humility. Humility is tied to you're not the only one achieving anything. You're not in that role because you are the smartest in the room. You are in that role because you have something to give, and people recognize that you have that you have something to give and you can give it. Of course, courage, taking tough decisions, standing by your decisions, whether the results are good or bad. Because sometimes you can have everything in place. You have a strategy, you've done all your result, your research, you've discussed with your team. Ultimately, the final decision on what to do and execute will lie with you. Followers by nature do not take tough decisions. They wait for the leader to do that. That is why I hate being a follower. Because as a follower, it means I do not have courage. I want somebody else to shield me in case something goes wrong. And then the final one is vision, the ability to see what must be done, see if it has been done before, or you have to do something from scratch, and the ability to craft that vision for others to see. Right? For those of us that are here, if you're not a Christian, there's a book in the Bible called the Book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk chapter 2, Habakkuk says, I will stay on the rampart and I will wait to hear what God will ask me and what I have to answer. And then he said, God told him and said, see the vision. Write it upon tables so that those that read it may run with it. It might take time to be fulfilled. He said, wait for it. He said, because the vision is for an appointed time and it will always come. It will not be late. It will not tarry. So vision is very important in human endeavor, whether in the political space or the commercial space. So let's talk about dreams. D1. So dream is a succession of images. Basically, I'm sleeping, I'm dreaming. But it goes beyond that. Right? A dream is an aspiration, a hope, a wish, a desire, an imagination. When Steve Jobs came back into Apple computers, he started Apple first. He built the Macintosh, which was a total departure of the kind of computers that are available at that time. He caught the imagination of people by storm. The organization became a very profitable organization. He then brought in people from other industries that did not understand his vision and his dream. They were looking at the numbers and then they kicked him out. Of course, when they kicked him out, he went to start Next Computers because he was a man of vision, right? He always felt that things should be done differently. Machines should be created in such a way that they interact with humans in such an interesting way. And by the time Apple Computers started having problems, they came back to begging. And then, of course, he told them he had to come back as a CEO. He came back, he matched Apple Computers and Next Computers together, borrowed some money from Bill Gates, who to the outside world was his competitor, and then changed Apple Computers. So the Apple Inc. that we see today was a result of the vision. And one of the first things it did, one of the greatest things it did that changed the direction of that organization was the fact that it saw that computers were tools and that phones could be built that could do what computers could do, that the power of computing will increase and that we needed to look for a way to take advantage of that. But what really defined all that was the fact that he said, why do we carry disc around to listen to music? We can create a system whereby anybody anywhere in the world can log into a system and download any music they want and pay for it and carry it in their phone or in a device that is in their hands that can basically load music that is equivalent to music that can fill a standard bedroom. And that was how iTunes came, for those of you that are familiar with iTunes. When iTunes was developed as an MP3, as a repository of music in MP3 files, there were different kinds of MP3 players in the world. Sony had already developed one. There are different kinds of MP3 players, but in those ones, you have to look for a way to take the music in the disc or in the cassette, download it onto a computer, and then load it on the MP3 player. He then decided Apple needed to develop an MP3 player that is unique. Unique in what way? It has to be an MP3 player that has only one button. Only one button. Before then, MP3 players has several buttons. And then he put together a team of engineers and designers and told them what he wanted. And they said it was not possible. But in his mind's eye, he has seen it. that we could do this. He did not consider the difficulty. Rather, he considered the fact that we could do this if we put our mind to it. So every design they brought to him, for as long as the buttons were more than one, he rejected it until they came up with the iPod. One button, and that was it. And that was how the iPod was launched. And the iPod, basically, then his next step in his situation is doing, oh, listen, I can take a phone and combine it with the iPod so I can have a phone and an iPod in the same device. And that was how the first iPhone was born. And then today, we then have phones now that are doing things more infinitely more powerful than what computers were doing then, right? And computers, and from there you then have parts today, iPad and Samsung and so on and so forth and so on. So that's what a dream is. A dream is an imagination. A dream is something that you long for. It's a condition you long for. It's a destination that you desire, right? Sometimes it could come from your thoughts, your struggles, your emotions. It could come from events of the past. It could come from your interactions with people, or your interaction with places, or interaction with symbols, right? But everybody has the ability to dream. That's one thing I want to leave with you. Everybody has the ability to dream. Now, Martin Luther King says, I have a dream. He gave an I have a dream speech, right? In August 20th of August, 1963. And what was his dream? An America where everybody will be judged by what is in their head and what they can achieve with what is in their head rather than their color, right? Other people other people did that, and that Martin Luther's dream influenced quite a lot of other people. And you see that on this slide. You have Randy Fripper, you have Benjamin O. Davis Jr. These are people that went on to fulfill leadership as Black men in the military, in the US Air Force, just because Martin Luther King said something. And Martin Luther King also looked at some of the things that those guys have achieved, and that was what drove what he said. Now, that's Martin Luther King's dream of what he wants America to be, are some of the things that put people like Barack Obama in the seat as US president. But a dream without the proper decision-making process behind it sometimes or most times will not see the light of day. So let's say, for example, there's somebody on this call that dreams for a Nigeria where, irrespective of where you come from, will be one people, indivisible. We can go to anywhere in the country and live there and contest for political office and make an impact in the lives of the people there, because that is where we live. Now, for you to then achieve that dream, with all the seemingly insurmountable problems that you see, you then need to sit down and put together a clear plan of action. You need to know whether you are 20 and it's going to take you 40 years to get there. So maybe you become a president by the age of 60 finally, and then you want to launch your dream, or you become a president by the age of 56, and in your first 4 years, because you have a process behind what you're doing, you can achieve that. For that process, for you to be able to put that plan, you must learn to make proper decisions, effective decisions. So let's talk about the decision-making process. Drucker, who was one of the foremost management thinkers of his generation, in 2006, outlined a number of stages in a typical decision-making process. And these are the following steps. A clear realization of what the problem is, whether the problem is generic, whether the problem can be solved, is established. Whether there's a rule or a principle out there, then a definition of the specifications to which the answer to the problem has to satisfy. Now, in science, we call that boundary conditions. If I go beyond this boundary, has that solution or has that answer answered the problem? You must be able to define that. And that's why trying to make a decision alone can be pretty difficult. That's why you see organizations, they will do what is called a SWOT analysis. They sit down and do Oh God, I've forgotten some of those phrases where they do events where they put themselves together in a retreat and think about the problem of the organization and think about what they can do to solve it. Right? They do a brainstorming. That's what I was thinking of, a brainstorming and so on and so forth. Then the next thing is thinking through what is right, because by the time you have dumped down all the specifications, you have established all the boundary conditions, you still have to go through it and think through what is right. That is, will the solution fully satisfy the specifications? Before attention is given to the compromises that I need to make, the adaptations to the solution or the concessions that I need to make that decision acceptable. We need to look through all that. What is not right, we discard. And whatever is remaining, we now start looking at it. Does it fit in 100%? What do we compromise? How do we adapt this? What are the concessions? This also drives the concept of innovation. Innovation sometimes is not developing something new. It's basically taking something that is existing and tweaking it to solve a new problem. So you can have innovation in technology, you can have innovation in HR, you can have innovation in finance, you can have innovation even in the political space. Some people have postulated that maybe Africa does not need a full democracy. Maybe what Africa needs is a benevolent dictatorship. Why? Because the majority of the African populace, compared to the Western where democracy is not at that level of the Western world. So maybe we need a model like the Singapore model, where you had one strong man come up, love these people so much, but enforce the decisions of government and ensure that these people follow through, with the net effect of not filling his own pocket or the pocket of his family, but with the net effect of turning Singapore, which is a city. It's just like when you take Lagos and you turn Lagos into a country, turn Singapore into a city state. Singapore used to be part of Malaysia. The British took Malaysia, I think Indonesia, and Singapore and lumped them together. And then Singapore decided I think it was in the 60s, listen, we need to go away. Why? Because they saw quite a lot of funny things going on. They were being marginalized and so on. And they said, let's go our way and let us focus on building something new. Now, if the person that made that move had been a dictator that was only interested in filling his pockets, like some of the leaders we have today, that thing would have failed. But it was a benevolent dictator that felt that, listen, we need to enforce some decisions, but we do it for the love of the country, not for myself, not for my family. Maybe that's what Africa needs. Maybe not. Right? But those are some of the things we need to think of. That's some things we need to subject to this decision-making process. Then we build, the next thing is then number 4, build into the decision of the action so that you can carry it out. Then ensure that you have a feedback process where you're testing the validity and the effective of that decision against the result, the actual course of events as you initiate it. And you must be truthful to yourself to change tack if it does not work. Madness has been defined as doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So that's why feedback is important, to ensure that you can adjust. Now, this is what Drucker said. A decision is a judgment. It is a choice between alternatives. It is rarely a choice between right and wrong. It is at best a choice between almost right and probably wrong, because much more often a choice between two courses of actions, neither of which is probably more nearly right than the other. Now, this is important in the political space. The few times I go on Twitter or the few times I read newspapers, because I don't, or I watch the news, I see people vehemently defend their position about a decision of government on both sides. And then you then see people labeling each other, oh, you are a Buhari hater, you're a Buhari lover, you're this, you're that. I laugh when I watch those things. You know why? And I'll tell you why. The people in government, whether that decision was taken for their selfish interests or not, have access to infinitely more information than those of us walking on the streets have. Then they've decided on what to do based on that. Now, a lot of times when we on the streets, when we jump into the conversation and we face each other, we are emotional in that conversation. Most cases, we do not have access to the right level of information. We allow our emotion or our senses of right and wrong to determine the position that we take. And sometimes it's not right and wrong on the issues, it's right and wrong based on who is the person that took the decision or who is the representative of government that we can throw mud at, right? When we do that, our judgment is flawed. What I believe the populace should do, and that is why maturity and education becomes extremely important. And I don't know what you're learning on all the other models, but and that's one of the reasons why you're in South Africa, to learn, to see things more than the average guy on the streets, right? You then need to go back and look, okay, fine. This decision, what is the impact on the nation as a whole? What is the impact on different parts of the country? What is the impact on me? If I have to suffer for the country to enjoy, what is that impact? How much will it cost me? What is the decision going forward? An important one, let's look at one. If I start that conversation, I know we will not leave here, so I'm not going to start conversation, but let me put it out there. When you look at the conversation about fuel subsidy in Nigeria, some of us were not born when fuel subsidy started. We grew up to meet it. And when we sit down, we consider the pain we'll go through. If that thing is yanked off, we vehemently say that the government should not yank it off. Some of us have used the fact that we produce oil. And because we produce oil, government should give us fuel free because our refineries must work as an argument. Now, if you look at it purely from commercial principles, if I was in government in the time of Gowon, because it was Gowon that started fuel subsidy, when we first discovered oil, when we first realized that Nigeria had money, if I was in government then, I would have vehemently said, do not put fuel subsidy. And I'll explain why. When you give man something free, and man gets used to it, the day you are going to take that thing, even if you give him as a favor from you, the man will vehemently fight you, because the moment you give them something free and they don't pay for it, they see it as their right. And Nigeria cannot survive fuel subsidy for the foreseeable future. But no government has the political will to remove it, because it will impact the society, it will impact the economy as starters. Now, what most people then don't realize is this: diesel is not regulated anymore, so there's no subsidy on diesel. There is no subsidy on cooking gas. Government has removed subsidy on kerosene. So the only thing now, which is DPK, the tanker name is DPK, dual purpose kerosene. Petrol is PMS and diesel is AGO. So the only thing that has subsidy on it is PMS. And how do you know? Diesel, the price of diesel goes high in relation to the international price of oil in the market. The price of gas, cooking gas, does exactly the same thing. The reason why government removed subsidy from kerosene was to reduce the use of kerosene for domestic cooking so that people can move to gas. Now, can the problem be solved? Yes, but it cannot be solved by government building refineries. It can be solved by government encouraging people to build refineries, but yanking off subsidies so that those that build refineries can then start to sell their PMS based on market prices. And that ultimately, the force of demand and supply will then drive down the price of PMS. But if you go back and look at all the refineries in country today, none of the refineries, because you have private refineries in country today, there is no private refinery in the country that is producing PMS, because you get all those products from the same crude oil through fractional distillation. But you see refineries producing diesel, you see refineries producing gas, you see refineries producing aviation fuel, which is also a very derivative of petrol, because all those ones are not deregulated. So market forces are determining the price of that one. So those refineries can make a profit. But PMS, that the majority of the people use because of transportation, no refinery is producing it because the subsidy is not allowing them to get economic returns. And no businessman, no entrepreneur solves a problem without getting some of an economic return over the long term. So that's one of those conversations I put out there. You might disagree with me, but that's okay. But I just want to put out there that those are some of the decisions that when it gets into the public discourse, our decision-making process in the public discourse is flawed, because the way we look at it is different from the way a proper decision-making process should be done. Let me jump up to no, 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 no. So let's talk about practical guidelines for effective decision making. We need to identify and define the problem, because if you don't define the problem, you cannot solve it. Problems are mainly vague in our minds. One of the best ways to do it is sit down with a sheet of paper and write down the problem the way you understand it, and then try to crystallize the issue so you can deal with it. The next step is you then go about gathering and analyzing information, because you must have accurate information to solve issues appropriately. And don't rush to solve it, to get a solution, because when you rush to get a solution, you can shortchange the process, because when you're not trying to execute on the solution you have, it could cause unnecessary delays. So make sure you take time to gather the right information to develop the right solution. Then when you have all the information, or you believe you have all the information, now start to develop alternative solutions. There's a popular proverb that you don't get to the market using only one route. There are many routes to the market. That's basically what it means. You could have a solution that initially looks like the best, but by the time you start to test that solution, start to challenge that solution, start to use your boundary conditions, you might then see that, oh, there are too many issues with this solution. That's why you need to develop alternative solutions. And then when you have developed alternative solutions, when you have tested each one of them, choose the best alternative, right? Narrow down your choices to a few of the best alternatives by evaluating your options, and then pick the best alternative, and then take action, execute on that alternative. And then, like I said, check it, test your execution, and make sure that you have progress. The results that you get shows that you are solving the problem as you go along. Destination is the final one. We have 7 minutes to go before we get to questions. So let's deal with destination. When you look at African leadership, and you look at some leaders within Africa, right? Nelson Mandela comes across as one person that stands out. And you see that when he passed away, I think it was in 2013, I think, right? And people talked about his government was morally substantial. His government, if Nelson Mandela was not politically intelligent and did not have a high level of moral standing, South Africa would have burnt. Nelson Mandela, being the president of South Africa, when he became president of South Africa, was very critical to the survival of that country. Because all the white people in South Africa that as Blacks will feel hatred towards were born in South Africa. So they don't have any other place to go to. And Nelson Mandela saw that. He saw that. So rather than come up with poor and malevolent leadership, what Nelson Mandela did was he basically led, he didn't rule, he led South Africa from a perspective of we are all the same. This is our country. We have our differences, but we need to move forward. Unfortunately, when you look at Africa, from Abidjan to Djibouti, Lagos to Johannesburg, Freetown to Kinshasa, Darfur to Kampala, Cape Town to Cairo, there are leaders like Nelson Mandela that are very few and far between. So what do? We need an optimistic approach to governance in Africa. Look at past African presidents. Hastings Banda, president of Malawi from 64 to 66. Look at his achievement, repressive regime. He sought to drive anti-communism, but because of that, there were human rights violations, right? It was pro-development, yes, it was pro-women rights, but he ran a very repressive regime, and there were a lot of human rights violations. Look at Ahmed Sékou Touré, Guinea, first president, 58 to 84. Basically, it was a virtual dictatorship. He drove socialism and Marxism, but eventually embraced capitalism later. But he was a proponent of Pan-Africanism, where African countries see themselves as one, even if they're countries, but you see yourself as Africans rather than different tribes within Africa. John Jerry Rawlings, from 93 to 2001, was extremely revolutionary, drove capitalism. Although when he started, everybody thought it was more of a socialist, but drove capitalism, and he was pro human rights. But he was a tough guy. To get Ghana to listen to him, he had to first execute quite a lot of corrupt leaders. Nelson Mandela, 94 to 99, as president. He was pro-reconciliation, like I said, pro-capitalism, pro-human rights activism, and it drove integrated national development, looked for a way to ensure that the Blacks also are part of national development and economic development also. So what are the failures of African leadership? 3 minutes to go. One, economic. A number of challenges in the 21st century and going forward if Africa does not wake up. Economic challenges are there. And it's a failure of African leadership because of misappropriation of public funds, embezzlement, financial mismanagement, money laundering, and all the likes. Poorly implemented engineering programs like SAP and so on. When you look at SAP, for example, we tend to blame World Bank and IMF. But guess what? Anybody that is going to loan you his money and knows that there's a danger you will not pay back, one, we put such a high interest on that money and insist you must start paying the interest from the first month so that at least they can mitigate their losses, even if you don't pay back the principal. Or they will tell you how to run your home, how to run your business. Social issues, ethnicity, ethnic violence, genocide, civil wars, all over, right? You see, look at Rwanda and Burundi, between the Hutus and the Tutsis and the Twas, Darfur. Look at Nigeria, Niger Delta and other people, the Nigerian civil war. Look at Liberia, look at Sierra Leone. Religious violence, sectarian violence, sectionalism, communal violence. These are all the failures of African leadership. When I say African leadership, I'm not talking about the leaders, I'm talking about us as a people. As a people, we have failed to lead ourselves properly. Political failure, failure in political leadership, where rather than look for a way to bring everybody together, we are driving Machiavellian arrogance of power. We are determining what happens, where we have civilian presidents that are practically dictators. And that is why sometimes you see the military take over, but the military are also not any better. Because the only language the military truly understands is force. So when they say, we want you to do this and you don't want to listen, boom, they come on you. And that then leads to, these three then lead to health and climatic challenges. Africa is not ready for energy transition. Africa is not ready for global warming. And for example, water scarcity will hit Africa hard more than any other nation in the world or any other continent in the world. You see, HIV/AIDS is, if not for the help of the Western world, we were going to be in trouble. Thank God, because when you look at COVID, they thought COVID was going to decimate Africa. But if not for the fact that God had helped us build resilience in our reactions to malaria and so on, COVID would seriously have decimated Africa. But all is not lost. All hope is not lost, because Africa is an emerging market. Africa is a land of economic and financial opportunity. Like I said, the oil and gas industry in Africa started to see that. So we're pushing back on the energy transition conversation that Africa needs to develop. But Africa cannot develop by producing oil and gas and selling it internationally. Africa needs to look for a way to generate money internally, drill those oil fields, get the oil and gas out, and use part of it to develop ourselves. So Africa is an emerging market, and until we see Africa as an emerging market for ourselves, the international world cannot see Africa as an emerging market. They will always want to determine how much money they release into Africa. Now, this slide I put together last year, but you see the top 10 wealthiest African countries, you see them there on that slide: Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Algeria, Morocco, right all the way to Angola. Right? So Africa is an emerging market. The potential in Africa is huge. It's huge. Look at the richest African countries by GDP per capita. Right? Gross domestic product per capita. Right? You see that Nigeria is not even in that list because we don't have an industry. Because we depend only on oil. Right? Now, Equatorial Guinea depends only on oil, but they are so small. So when you look at what they produce, your gross domestic product divided by the population of the country, you see that is $18,000. Seychelles is tourism that drives that mostly. Mauritius is also tourism, right? Botswana, I don't know what drives Botswana, but I know Gabon is partly oil and some precious minerals and so on and so forth. So, what is the end from the beginning? This is the last one and I'll stop. More than half of the world's population lives in urban areas, generating 80% of global GDP. 70% of humanity by 2050 is expected to live in cities and towns. So you then see that same trend in Africa. Most people are moving into the urban areas. What Africa needs to do is, how do we make the rural areas interesting so that people do not move to the urban areas? Basically, what we need to start doing is start moving industries into the rural areas. And that is driven by government partnering with the private sector. And that's why governance is important. Extremely, extremely, extremely important. So for those of you that are young men and young women on this call, I need you to dream. Dream. Start to put your plans together now. Start to challenge your perceptions. Start to go through a process of looking at thorny issues in the public discourse, not from an emotional perspective, but from a decision. Use a decision-making matrix where you try to understand what are the inputs here. Why is it that governments are taking decisions? Then decide what your destination is. Do you want to be a national leader? Do you want to be a global leader? Do you want to be a leader at the town level? Do you want to be a leader at the local government level, at the state level? And start dreaming towards it, start putting together, start developing yourself, start looking towards how you can ensure that you help Africa to get to the next level that God has determined that it should get to. That's why I want to stop today, because we don't have time anymore. So questions and none. So I believe that you will moderate that. Questions, contributions, disagreements. I welcome disagreements also. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Ayo, for such an insightful session. I've been listening myself. Guys, this is a time where we ask our questions and we share our thoughts from the session today. Do we have questions? Ruth, I see someone called Itohowo. I don't think I've seen that name before. Emanuela, Elizabeth, I think we've lost about 3 people. Maybe network issues or something. Do you guys have questions? Okay, if there are no questions, then let's hear your thoughts from the session today. Was one thing that Mr. Ayo Shote shared that really resonated with you, and something that you're taking out of the session that you're going to apply on your own journey? Emanuela, please go first. Tell us something that he shared that resonated with you.
Okay, so good morning. Today's session was very educative and insightful. The part where he talked about Adolf Hitler's leadership being very effective, it gave me a new perspective towards looking at leadership and the various types, like approaches of leaders. So today's class was really nice and very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Emanuela. Elizabeth, we would like to hear from you. What's one thing that was shared that resonated with you?
Okay, one thing that he shared that resonated with me most was the need for us to have a dream, the need for us to be good leaders that would influence our decisions on people and not being autocratic. That's basically what resonated with me.
Yeah, that's really good. Good to hear that. That's what you're taking. Ruth, let's hear from you. What's one thing you want to share?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. So I would really like to throw light on the last bits that we just had, looking at how certain presidents of certain African countries have, after the colonization system, have put up their states to function I was just going to say that the dreaming effect is the dreaming aspect of what I heard is one of the best places to start from, because we are supposed to take over a new Africa, a new state, a new country of where we come from, and how to do that has become a bit difficult for us, because we tend to take assumptions or even give, excuse me, our opinions on the level of emotions, and hardly do we understand the root causes that even if a leader is bad but effective, the level of effectivity also counts. Is it, like we learned in the past class, is it a level below a certain index? So effectivity too has a criteria, has a standard of measurement. So I feel this is a very great point, looking at how I've heard of Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, and others. They even tried to build a new Africa. The mindset of maybe one Africa was there. But how do you do that if internally nations are still, not really tied it up in their own home country? So to me, the effect of dreaming is one of the best aspects, where we, the young ones, have to dream, have to be in places like Song Africa, to get the bits that we need to start working around what can we change? How can we become an agent of change? And that's just the most interesting part ahead. And aside the fact that I have heard of different types of leadership, and obviously I believe it comes from what we have been seeing in terms of alternation of powers, where governments have changed, but in a wrong way, changing governments in a different way, but in a wrong way. We don't see much effectivity. So I believe we need to start from there, understanding the concept of good governance, seeing the types of leadership, and beginning to take charge. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I like what you said about taking charge and dreaming. I see Itohowo Ikot in the comments says it's good to dream and we have dream killers. How do we combat dream killers, please? Mr. Shote, how do we combat dream killers?
So when you say dream killers, you basically mean that people that you share your dreams with, and then they will shut it down by telling you all the difficulties in achieving that dream. Am I right?
Itoho, what do you want to
Just type and say yes or no. Okay, while we're waiting on him, that would be my first. So he said yes, fine. So the first thing you need to do in that process is this: you need to learn from the story of Joseph in the Bible. And if you've not read the story of Joseph in the Bible, go to the book of Genesis and go read about Joseph. Joseph made the fundamental mistake of thinking that the people in his closest circle would believe in his dream. And he shared his dream with them. But the way he shared his dream with them also had an impact. Because when he shared his dream with them, it made it seem as if he was superior to them, because God was showing him that he was going to be a ruler over them. So there was a fault on his side. So he was also the de facto dream killer. And there was a fault on his brother's side, because they saw him as a threat to their well-being and to their authority. When you have a dream, the very first process of your dream is internalize the dream yourself. Go through some of the things I've said about trying to understand what are the difficult things that can affect that dream. What are the information that you need to gather to either crystallize the dream in your mind or shut down the dream that, oh, this is not the right dream to have. When you get that, you then need to make sure that the people you are going to share the dreams with are people that have the attitude of encouraging you no matter the difficulty. So people I mentor know one thing. If they come to me with a dream, I never tell them anything about their dream is bad. But I take them through a process of trying to crystallize the dream and narrow it down. And one of the best ways to do that is to find fantastic dream. How are you going to implement? The moment you start going through, oh, this is what I need to implement, this is where we start from, this is where we start from. My job then is to then make sure they put those steps in the proper perspective. If there's a big problem in one of those issues, I will make the problem known to them, but immediately we then start to have a conversation of, okay, how do you then solve the specific problem? You see, the thing about dreams is this: that you dreamt does not mean the dream will come to pass. Let us understand that. A lot of dreams that have remained in the level of dreams. They remain there in our heads. But when you take a dream out of your head and you start to put it down and write it down and challenge perceptions and ask questions of yourself, what you want to achieve, and start to narrow it down to, okay, what is it? And you must be clear-eyed. You don't tell yourself because it's a dream that everybody will accept it. You expect people to say no. The moment people say no, this cannot work. Look for somebody that recognizes the difficulties in making that work, but is willing to help you through thinking about how to solve the problem. That is how you deal with dream killers. So there are some that you know they're so negative, and you will know in your normal interaction with them, they're always negative. They're always complaining about things. They're always complaining about people. They're always complaining about why something can never work. They're always saying that this is bad. They're always saying that that is bad. They're always saying that Africa is a terrible place. People like that will kill your dream. Avoid them. For people that say, okay, I know things are difficult, but even within the context of my sphere of influence, how do I continue to influence people and achieve and do my own small bit? Those are people that most likely you can share your dream with because they will help you go through the process of crystallizing that dream properly. That will be my answer.